Investing a relatively small amount of money into some of these yield max option income strategy ETFs can definitely generate dividend-focused, income-focused investors a ton of dividends on a monthly basis, and this is because these style of ETFs, at least historically speaking, because of their unique strategy, have been able to distribute a ton of money on a monthly basis for investors, at least this far. Now in this video, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the CONY ETF, specifically the CONY Option Income Strategy ETF. We're going to go over what this ETF has to offer, how it works, and I'm going to show you how a relatively small amount of money, just $10,000, could generate a significant amount of dividends on a monthly basis for investors, at least potentially. Now, if you're more of a dividend income focused investor that's searching for some high yield, make sure to stick around, drop a like down below, and let's get right into it. I have some huge news to share with you guys. My brand new dividend investing ebook and custom dividend tracker that I've been working on for weeks now is finally done. So go ahead and grab a copy down below. It's the first link in my description. Thank you in advance, and let's get right into the video. Now, looking a little bit deeper into CONY to see how this fund works, it says right here on the website, the fund does not directly invest into coin. So because CONY is a coin option income strategy ETF, coin or Coinbase is the underlying reference stock that CONY uses, and then with the use of options is able to generate a ton of money on a monthly basis. Now, it also says investing in this fund involves a high degree of risk, and also important, the fund strategy will cap its potential gains if coin shares increase in value. So all in all, CONY has a lot of attributes that are very similar to other covered call style ETFs out there. Now looking a little bit deeper into CONY's distributions, at least up until this far, because side note, this ETF has not been around all that long, but at least so far, as you saw a second ago, this ETF has been able to distribute a lot of dividends, which gives the ETF over a 50% yield as a current. Now the distributions over the past few months at least was $1.20, this was back in October, then it's over $1.07, $2.46 back in December, then almost $2.70, this was back in January, and then the recent dividend was a little bit smaller. The recent distribution was only $1.07, but again, still for an ETF that costs around 20 bucks, still very, very impressive. Now to dig a little bit deeper into CONY, look at the performance of this ETF so far, etc. This ETF year to date is down around 20%. So CONY did have a nice run up back last year, and towards the end of it, CONY dropped from around $28 per share all the way down to under $20 per share. And then just as of recently, as Bitcoin and crypto are back on their way up, Coinbase, which is the underlying reference stock, of course, for CONY, is driving CONY back up, trading at least as of right now towards the middle end of the 52-week range. Now, one thing that's very important to point out before we go any further is the fact that at least on the max time frame, when it comes to price return, price performance for this ETF, CONY is actually up in the green. This ETF is actually up 22.53%. Now, in case you're a little bit confused on why that's so significant and why that's so important, it's simply because a lot of these higher yield option income styled ETFs out there, like things like TSLY or even things like JEPB or JEPQ, a lot of these sort of higher yield option strategy ETFs seem to decay in price long term. And this is of course because of the mechanics of the strategy that these ETFs use, basically the covered call strategy where the upside is capped but the downside is not capped. Now that being said, CONY is up around 22% on the max time frame, but again, keep in mind this ETF has only been around since around August, so there isn't all that much data to go off of, and we did see it fall off a cliff a few months back. But that being said, the ETF is green, which means those investors that got in pretty much any time at this point, unless you bought at the all-time highs, you probably are doing pretty decent considering the dividends have been so great also. Now looking into the holdings for CONY, this is kind of interesting and gives you an idea again of the mechanics and how this ETF works. You see, as of right now, this ETF looks like it's holding on to a lot of United States Treasury bills. Then on top of that, there's also some cash secure puts and other different options that make up the ETF as of right now. But also important to note that the holdings are going to change around a lot because this ETF is very actively managed, which brings me into the next sort of negative about this ETF, the expense ratio. The expense ratio is just around a 1% expense ratio, which is significant, at least if you're comparing this to like index funds. But for this style of ETF, a lot of investors like myself are sort of getting used to this 1%-ish expense ratio, if you're of course talking about an ETF that's as actively managed as this one. Now before we go through and I show you exactly how much money in dividends an investor could earn from CONY, with just $10,000 invested, I think it's also quite interesting to see how CONY has performed long term since his ETF's inception. If an investor were to have invested $10,000 in, and this was back in August of last year, and also important, this is with dividends reinvested. So this is every single time CONY paid dividends along the time frame that we're going through, all the dividends were reinvested into more shares of CONY. Let's take a look. So if an investor bought $10,000 worth of CONY over the last half year or so, they would have turned that $10,000 into around $16,600 plus. And again, this is if all dividends were reinvested back into more shares of CONY. Now, over the last half year, that's a total return of 66.22%. So as much as some investors want to hate on some of these yield max ETFs, Cony, for example, definitely has had a massive return, at least so far. And if we were to annualize this return, if dividends were reinvested, we're talking 132+% annualized, which of course is massive. And unless I'm wrong, there's not many other investments across the entire market that have returned over 60%, at least over the time frame that we're talking here. Now, on the same token, I think it's only fair if we compare Cony's performance versus Coin's performance, which again, Coin or Coinbase is the underlying reference stock that of course Cony uses. So it's only fair to compare the father to the son. So over the same exact time frame that we talked about with Cony, if you were to have just invested $10,000 in Coin stock, you would have received $0 in dividends, so there's no dividends reinvested because Coin does not pay a dividend. But during that same time frame, this investor would have received 102.55% total return, which is almost double that of the investor that invested into Cony. So even though Cony did very well in this time frame, Coin, the underlying stock, did much better, which does beg the question, if you believe in Coin, if you want to have exposure to the underlying reference stock that Cony uses, then maybe just invest into Coin, and that definitely makes for a pretty good argument. Although I understand some more income dividend focused investors like to invest in some of these higher yielding ETFs because they do have a strategy that goes along with it. But that being said, over the same exact time frame, Coin would have been a much better investment and would have turned $10,000 into over $20,000 in just half a year. Now, if you're still watching this video, you're here to see exactly how much in dividend income you could receive on a monthly basis by investing just a relatively small amount of money, $10,000, into the CONY ETF. Now, the trailing 12-month dividend payout for Cony was $8.52, which means on average on a monthly basis, Cony's paid out around 71 cents per share. And again, this is all just estimated because Cony has not even paid that many dividends so far. Now, because we're talking with $10,000 and Cony ETF is around $23 per share right now, that means with $10,000, you could purchase around 434 shares of Cony as of right now, which off of our most recent calculations, we see that Cony has paid on average around 71 cents per share per month, which means with a $10,000 investment, an investor on average, at least going off of the previous historical numbers, can receive around $308 and some change on a monthly basis in dividend income. Now, like we talked about towards the beginning of the video, Cony does not pay the same amount in distributions on a monthly basis. Cony's paid as high as $2.70 and as low as around $1.08. And the amount that Cony pays out is going to be very similar to that of any other option style ETF. It's going to have a lot to do with the underlying reference stock, in this case Coin, and of course the volatility priced into the market, which is going to make options much more expensive or cheaper depending on what's going on. Now, my final thoughts on Cony, and if not, this is going to be an ETF that I'm personally going to be adding into my portfolio. Cony, along with a lot of these other sort of higher yielding ETFs, to me personally are more of a gamble play, and I would never personally make up the majority of my portfolio with names like these. Now, that being said, I do have some shares of Cony throughout my portfolios. I also have some shares of TSLY, but because of the sporadic nature of these ETFs, how they trade, and of course the unreliable dividends that really more or less are all over the place, depending on how the underlying trades and the volatility throughout the market within a given time frame, these ultra high yield ETFs, for me personally, will always remain a small portion of my overall portfolio. But in the talks of the Yield Max Coin Option Income Strategy ETF, now I want to hear from you guys down below. Do you personally own any shares of Cony in your portfolio? And if so, how many shares do you have as of right now? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like down below and subscribe for more. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.